Hi everyone, thanks for tuning in to our Emmy Contenders series. My name is Yvonne Villareal and I cover television. We're here today with Carmen Ejogo, who starred in the 3rd season of True Detective. She played Emilia, a teacher connected to 2 students who go missing in the 1980s, and the wife of one of the detectives who follows the case. And she later writes a book about it. It's a pleasure to have you here.
Thank you. My pleasure to be here.
How did my intro compare to all your years of experience
Being in your chair. Yeah, very good. I saw the auto cue. I was like, oh wow, I forgot how you have to sort of like make it look like you're just sort of talking to the screen, but actually you're reading words as you're doing it. So yeah, it was a bit of a flashback.
How long were you a host?
Gosh, I started out hosting, I fell into it by accident when I was about 16, and I had my own music show for a while, and then I did another sort of kids show for a bit. And at the time, I always knew it was just sort of transient and it was never going to be the thing. It was almost like pocket money, you know, but I'm actually really grateful for the things I learned, because now I have a different kind of ease sitting in this chair, you know, and knowing what's going to come at me and knowing how to sort of do this thing, which I might not have had training in otherwise. So.
And you know that not to say anything bad when you have the mic on, right?
That I'm not as good at. I forget. I forget regularly on set as well. Yeah,
Really?
I often forget. Yeah.
That's amazing. So, True Detective, you only had maybe 2 or 3 scripts, right, at the start of it, like when you were presented with the part. And Emilia is very much a background character in those first 2 episodes.
Right.
Not too much there yet.
Yeah.
Was there ambivalence for you about playing backup to 2 men, and what did Nic sort of tell you that persuaded you, or was it sort of a leap of faith that something more was to come?
It was all of those things. I mean, you always have to be sort of nervous about a show that has a reputation for being a very male-driven vehicle as to how the women are going to fit in. And I was conscious of the sort of critiques of the past seasons in that regard. So it was a little nerve-wracking to only have a few scripts in hand, but we all only had a few scripts in hand, so no one had more information than anyone else. But it didn't help me particularly in feeling sort of more comforted in knowing that Emilia's character was going to really have the impact that she ends up having over 8 episodes. So I did have to have a talk with Nic and, you know, understand where he was coming from and what his intentions were. And when I understood that for Nic, Emilia was always his secret weapon, and that in the end she emerges as, in some ways, the true detective of the season, and is the poetic voice. She's the subconscious to Wayne. She's supportive in all of these ways that actually, like so many women out there in the real world, you know, they seem supportive, but actually they're running the ship. And that's very much Emilia's role in the season. And so when he made that clear, I realized that the leap of faith was worth taking. And thank goodness I did, because it's both this incredibly subtle performance and nuanced character. It doesn't sort of like bash you over the head necessarily. And yet, as a culmination over 8 episodes, it's just so gargantuan what she brings to the show, and really I think she's you know, she's Wayne's North Star, the lead character's North Star, and maybe even sort of the moral conscience of the show in some ways. There is no show without Emilia.
No, there's not. Well, I was going to ask you, I mean, we first meet her, she's teaching a class and reciting a passage from a book, and you're sort of like lured in by her, just the sound of her voice, and like she's so calming, and you're just kind of like hypnotized by her. Was that intentional, like how you portrayed her and how you, like her voice and the mannerisms, and I don't know, she's just sort of like just lures you in.
Soothing, like seductive in ways.
Seduces you.
Yeah. Well, I mean, on a few levels. So the voice was really important to me, because I feel like Emilia is somebody who literally finds her voice as the show progresses, and she gets bigger in persona and presence. So I wanted to sort of start in a place that felt very sort of maternal, nurturing, so, you know, that she is a giver more than somebody that takes for herself. But it was very important for me that by the time you get into the 90s, that she starts to self-actualize and find her own strength and her own needs, and is willing to fight for those, maybe more than she is to sort of put herself secondary to her family and to her husband. There's an ambition that starts to sort of emerge in her. So that was really important. And also the sort of seductive quality of like the poetry. She's a bit of a siren, I suppose, in some ways, because she does sort of seduce Wayne. And they don't have a whole lot in common, but there is something on a chemical level that I think she brings and that he brings to her that makes them react and sort of fit. So, yeah, on many levels, I think there's something quite sort of seductress about her when we first meet her.
Well, before we talk about working with Mahershala, what was it like working with Nic? Because he's very much this sort of enigma, at least when it comes to talking to the press. He doesn't do many interviews, and he likes to keep a lot of things close to the vest, like in terms of his thoughts about storytelling sometimes. But for you, what was it like on the actor level working with him?
I was really impressed. He directs for the first time in this show 2 episodes, and they're 2 of the strongest in the season. And you know, I get the impression that one of the first things that directors learn is how to talk to actors. I think he's been to that class because he was really comfortable with it and really understood. I mean, it's his work, it's his writing, so there's nobody that's going to have a better sense of how to explain what the motivation of a scene is or in any given moment. So I found him awesome. I mean, it was a very intense experience for him. It's a very personal story to him, and so that energy was also always around. But I really, really loved working with him.
So, as we talked about in the beginning, so much of the focus or the fascination with this show has to do a lot between the chemistry of the detectives, like the dynamic between the official detectives. And what was interesting about this season is it's just as crucial is this dynamic between Emilia and her husband and what's going on there, what's at play there. Talk to me, what was it like working with Mahershala? How does his acting style compare to yours, and how did you guys sort of meet in the middle with it?
Sure. Yeah, so in the end, the show is all about the relationship, the marriage. It's all about Emilia and Wayne. And so it was critical that we found chemistry, that we found the authenticity to what Nic intended, which isn't always actually that we have obvious chemistry. Sometimes it's very clear, and then sometimes we're completely disconnected. Sometimes we have it's very discordant.
Right.
And so the complexity of that, to figure out how to bring that to the screen, was part of the thing that I recognized was going to be exciting and fresh about playing this kind of couple. There's a lot about this relationship that's quite mundane on the screen, but I love the fact that it was obviously embedded in the writing that we were going to get to play all of these sort of like strange, like push-pull, energetic sort of beats between us. And so Mahershala and I really had a lot of fun exploring that stuff. I mean, I say fun. it was challenging.
Yeah.
Because there would be days that we'd show up and we had to be super in love, and then there would be days we'd have to show up and we really had no connection. And so energetically, I think we have somewhat a different style in that I found him to be quite sort of considered and calculated and very clear-minded as to what he was going to aim for every time that he would come to the set. I would also have that approach, but I'm also quite sense memory. So I would very much react to the energy of the day and so I think that in some odd way that some slight mismatch of approach actually helped the work, yeah. And then I was flying back and forth from New York to Arkansas, so while Stephen Dorff and Mahershala stayed in town and just really got that thing tight, I actually think it really helped the fact that I was coming in and out, because it meant that Mahershala and I, we just had to keep kind of like starting again and at one point I had to decide, okay, this is a 6-7 month shoot. Do I just stay put and get that tight thing happening, or is this actually working for us?
Interesting.
This kind of coming and going, and I actually think it helped, because there's so much that is, that as I say, is discordant and that's, you know, that doesn't quite make sense about this couple. So yeah, somehow it all came together.
Had you guys worked together before or met each other before, or was this the first
Never.
thing?
Yeah.
Never.
And I didn't really know. I didn't know much of his work. I knew of him. He knew my work, and he thought of me for Emilia from the beginning. Apparently, I still had to sort of jump through various hoops to get the part, but I knew that whatever he'd seen of my work, he knew that I had the acumen, the things needed to play this role in all of its sort of dimensional, in all of its dimensions. So yeah, it was the first time meeting in Arkansas.
Wow. So I want to talk about some of the scenes that you shared together that were really standout moments, at least for me. First, the dinner that you guys have, where there's just so much is about in just the looks that you give. But I feel like that scene alone can win an Emmy. But so talk to me about that sequence. What you guys, were going for, what discussions you had beforehand.
Sure.
What did you think of it?
Gosh, there's so much happening in that scene, and it was, and again, back to the brilliance of Nic, is he is writing from such a place of honesty that, most scripts, when you read them, even the best, there is a certain kind of arc. There's a rhythm that is somewhat predictable, that we're all familiar with, that makes us feel comfortable, both as actors and viewers. And Nic doesn't worry about going there. So he has almost like his own language, there's almost like dyslexic sort of sentence structure at times, where it's really, you have to learn the way that he writes to be able to sort of just deliver vocally. But then, on top of that, I think rhythmically there's something that happens that is very disjointed and very sort of authentic in its sort of stop-start pacing. And also subject matter, it jumps from one thing to another, there's no real natural fluid sort of linearity to the stuff. So that's really challenging. But if you can pull it off and trust that it's gonna work, then it's super fresh and super engaging to watch and to play. It was something that, it took a few takes, and I think, if I remember rightly, there were definitely a couple of just sort of one-shot roaming cameras, takes that we did. So it was ambitious. It was definitely, every scene I felt between Mahershala and I was very ambitious in its approach. But when it works, it's stellar. Certainly as an actor to play, it was just the best.
Well, because you have that moment, and then there's that polar opposite scene where there's the arguing, the fights.
Yeah.
It starts in the kitchen, goes into the bedroom, and there's that moment, and I wrote it down. And
God, remind me.
I'll avoid the curse words, but he says, "Stop talking crap about me," and you're like, "Or what?" And he's like, "Or I'm gonna start crying."
Right.
Yeah.
Yeah. There's something so, and that's a moment that really, that Wayne's sensitivity sort of really emerges and shows itself very clearly, both to Emilia and to the audience for the first time. But again, the fact that that sort of momentum just kind of gets cut by that sort of line is just really beautiful, and I think that's a great scene. It's the shape of it. It got even trickier for me by the end because, sort of the cognitive dissonance that I have to then sort of demonstrate, where I'm sort of in the heat of the argument and have nothing to say good about this guy, and then I'm okay, let's just have sex, and find your way to that. There's something missing in the writing in between the two beats, and yet it's absolutely authentic that that's missing, because that's often how it plays out. So
yeah, so many people said it was such a striking portrait of the marital tensions that sometimes happen that we don't often see.
Yeah, I think the sort of minutiae and the sort of pedantic stuff of a marriage is something that Nic really imbued the script with, and really gave us a lot of license to make it feel very real.
One of their bigger blow-ups involves him basically feeling or voicing his frustration to her that he basically feels like she was using him, like that she's an opportunist. What did you think of that? And like, how do you view Emilia and what she was doing?
Yeah, gosh, she's so complicated. I think that she's somebody who, she may have had a closer relationship to those children that go missing than their own parents. So I think the motivation for writing the book and to exploring her community in the way that she does comes from a real, honest, earnest place. But I think as an artist and as somebody that is always trying to sort of find something grander and maybe bigger than the marriage she's found herself in, than the man she's chosen to marry, than the town that she grew up in that she still finds herself living in, for someone of that kind of level of intellect that we assume she has, I think there's just always this desire to sort of persevere and keep pushing through to something beyond. And that might look really like ugly ambition to some people, including Wayne at times. But I don't think it comes from a place that's anything other than just a fire in her belly to be self-actualized in all she can be. You know, but that often looks ugly in women, you know.
I was going to say, it's like his greatest failure or regret is her greatest success. Like, she finds a lot of growth through tapping into this part of her. And like you said, sometimes guys don't like to see that.
Absolutely, yeah. Well, and because I also think what happens, there's a lot of self-reflection that happens for Wayne. You know, one of my fears about taking on the role was that, you know, this was going to be just me sort of constantly sort of reacting to the Wayne character. And what I think is brilliant, that at some point it becomes a completely flipped scenario where Wayne is really reacting to the emergence of his wife. It's Emilia's rise that he then becomes emasculated by, and that we're then watching a man reacting to somebody that is losing sight of themselves in their own wife's success and rise. So that, I think, is a really interesting thing that Nic chose to do with both characters.
I mean, we talked about this somewhat a little bit about, this is a show that time jumps and is a little disorienting at times. How is that for you to navigate? I mean, we know Emilia in the 1980s when she's sort of this beguiling love interest, and then we see her in the 90s when she's a little bit more hardened. Did you have to ever have to jump between those two on the same day of filming? And like, how did, like, because with Coretta Scott, like playing Coretta Scott, you've had to do that. Like, did that help you?
Yeah, I definitely had a bit of a sort of trial run at it. The thing that I think I came into it with confidence is knowing that having played Coretta Scott King in two different eras, very different sort of sensibility and energy in her from the 50s relative to the 60s. I knew that you could make some very sort of strong choices in terms of the shift in journey and still find ways to make them feel like the same woman ultimately. And so I guess I had a sense of confidence in knowing that that even though we were going through such an enormous amount of time, that because of the fractured timeline, you in one episode you'll see elements of both, which could be really jarring and it feel like two different people potentially. But I think that somehow it remains cohesive. But I think the trick for me was just learning everything, all the material, like stacks of scripts by day one. I had to know all the timelines. I didn't have the luxury of sort of just working through one time frame and then on to the next, because sometimes we would jump from the 80s to the 2000s or back to the 90s in the same day, and not too often for me, but enough that I had to be ready for it. And so, yeah, just being really on top of my game in terms of learning my lines. I mean, that's a lot of, I don't know, that's like 8 hours of television to be ready for on day one, which is, you know, quite the task.
Well, and I don't mean to be superficial, but can we talk about the hair?
That is not superficial. I mean, hair is
hair
a major thing for some people. Yeah, tell the story.
Every decade.
Yeah.
Yes.
No, I'm obsessed with with wardrobe and hair and makeup as part of character. I can't imagine not being. And you know, I've been very lucky that I've had some amazing collaborators on that front. So Ruth Carter, I worked on Sparkle and Selma, and she was always so excited to work with me and figure out the aesthetic, the silhouette, all of that stuff. And the same here with Emma Potter, who did an incredible job. And so we really figured out how to understand what the aesthetic would be. Hair and makeup the same. Those departments were incredible. Brian Badie, who I worked with on hair, we went through old school books, old year school books from Arkansas of the time to see what black girls would have had, you know, how they would have worn their hair in that moment. And it was interesting because no one was wearing it natural, no one. And even though Emilia, you know, you get the idea that in her backstory that she's had sort of fringe Black Panther experiences. So she met, you know, initially Emma came to me with all of these images where, you know, it was full afro and black turtlenecks. Maybe it was like a play on that. But I kind of decided that for Emilia to have a job in this tiny little town, working in a school that would be all white, she would have to find a way to fit in and conform. So the hair had to be blown out, and it had to, you know, and that happened to be a look that I saw in various sort of ebony cover magazines of the times. That I thought that makes sense for her. And then get to the 90s, and I think she's become just a lot more sort of comfortable in her own skin. So her hair's like supernatural and long and a bit more boho-y. And then by the 50s, I feel like she's the kind of woman I hope to become, which is, you really don't care what anyone thinks at that point. And it's, you know, it's about practicality,
so sweet,
super sleek, you know, but she's, you know, I just think she looks like someone that's really come into their own and is doing their thing. So hair is not a superficial thing in my head when I take on a role, as any part of the costume. You know, the silhouette was a big deal in this one for me. You know, it was very cinched, very sort of self-conscious in the 80s, which sort of, again, sort of plays with that sort of idea of sort of seductress, but not fully confident with it at that earlier age. And then by the 40s, once she's had kids, I actually think she's a little sexier, a little sort of freer in herself, even though she's put on a bit of weight by then.
Looks great. Yeah. What was it like being part of something that comes with people trying to play detective? There's all these conspiracy theories. At one point, people thought Emilia was
right? Yeah.
How was that to navigate, or was it fun to see how people were trying to piece together these things and like considering you as?
Yeah. I mean, I didn't follow too much of the sort of reviewing of it all, but that stuff I found fascinating, and I think there was something enigmatic enough about the character and the way I played her that sort of, given the genre, sort of fed into like, you know, is that what she's doing? Which wasn't really the plan at all. But I do think I went into the show, I'm a big fan of the genre. So I was aware of the sort of rules of engagement, and knowing that sort of adding, that you never really know to the last episode what's really happened. So the ambiguity of it, I definitely had fun on the actual, in the actual performance, playing with a little bit, because while I always knew I hadn't done the deed, I think in the writing, we didn't get episode 8.
Wow.
So there was not real clarity as to who actually did do anything. Until we got that last episode. And so we were all sort of hedging bets as to what really fully had occurred. So that's probably in the performance a little bit.
Well, in the final episode, we don't really learn what ever happened to Emilia. And I know like how she died, like where she's been. And I think Nic had said that he originally had written a scene like that explains what happened, and that it got cut. Did you ever see the scene, and were you disappointed that that didn't make it in?
So I think it ended up being a time thing. There was a lot that ends up not being on the screen, which are great scenes and really sort of pivotal and important moments. I think it may be on a sort of DVD sort of extra sort of material.
You performed it?
We performed it. You actually see me in my 60s.
Wow.
And it's very conclusive as to how I die. And so it did sort of open up a big can of worms, you know, of well, what happened? Because people had become so invested in Emilia's journey, and to not have that final payoff, I think some people were really sort of wanting for that, and sad that it didn't come. But I think I think the fact that that exists somewhere and will be sort of released will be a nice sort of thing for fans to get their hands on at some point.
What did you think of the sort of final few moments of the final episode where it's them at a bar and then they head out into the lights? What did you think of what was going on there?
Oh, I was really emotional during that scene and after it, because I realized that we were making something really remarkable. This is such a spoiler, so sorry if you haven't seen all 8 episodes yet. But, you know, that final scene takes us full circle. And we didn't, like I said, we didn't have episode 8 in hand until quite far into the show. So we didn't understand that's what Nic was doing. And just the poetry of the season, and I get to be the deliverer of that poetry, it all just made so much more sense and just had so much more weight. And it was obvious that we were making really classic television that was going to be very ambitious. Couldn't be 100% sure if we'd pulled it off, but filming that scene, I was pretty sure we had.
Take it beyond a mystery anymore. Like, I think people get hung up on the whodunit aspect of some of these stories, and to not end on that sort of note, that this isn't about that.
Yeah, and the idea that this sort of show can actually have a sort of positive spin by the end, that it becomes about self-healing and about, it's really a meditation on time and love and really beautiful, grand ideas, just made it really feel like a wonderful, it just felt so good to have jumped on board. To know that it was so much more than even I'd anticipated it was going to be at the start.
When you're filming something so intense like this, I would hope there's some levity when the cameras aren't rolling. Is there an especially
Yeah, you'd hope, right? Nah, not on this one. No, it was pretty full on.
Really?
Like, yeah, it was pretty heavy. I mean, you know, there were no days off. You know, we're in the middle of a pretty rural part of the world, you know, for a lot of the time, and it was just relentless. You know, you're sleep deprived. It was like reminded of, you know, what it's like to have a baby. Like the first few months of having a kid, it's like when's the light at the end of the tunnel? Show it to me.
So no nights of karaoke, nothing like that?
No, a couple of drunken nights in town, but mostly just, you know, just doing the work. You know, this was a labor of love. And I think we all kind of had a sense it might be that when we got involved in at the start, because it was, you know, it's a lot of television, a lot of hours, and really complicated on the page stuff to navigate. So it's going to take your utmost concentration at all times to just feel confident that you're coming in the next day and you know exactly where you are timeline relative to your scene partner, and you need to know what they've been going through. That was something that was a lot of a challenge, because a lot of the stuff that Mahershala's character goes through, I don't necessarily know, but I still kind of need to know. So I really had to be aware of the entire season and all that meant every single day walking in. So yeah, not so fun, but you know, that's sometimes the hard work is the best work, and that was the case here.
And so what can you tell us about your follow-up, which is Rattlesnake, right, on
Yeah,
Netflix, which you're starring and you're producing?
Exec producing, yeah.
It's a thriller, right?
It's a thriller, and you know, everything I do is very different. My body of work kind of, that's for me the fun of it all, and so this is quite a departure from that. It's a sort of psychological horror. I go on a road trip with my daughter, and it all goes horribly wrong at some point. It becomes a race against the clock to sort of save her from dying, and really great newish director. I think this is his second feature, and it was a lot of fun. I filmed in New Mexico, which I love.
Wow.
I did the Girlfriend experience there too a couple of years ago, so I'm a big fan of that part of the world. And yeah, that will come out hopefully around the fall. And it was great to be just that little bit further involved by being exec producer and just having a bit more of hands-on and more of that in the future, I hope. And writing, directing right now is what I'm sort of aiming for too.
That's great.
Lots of ideas bubbling, so yeah.
Very cool. Well, we're going to end things with a lightning round.
Oh, this is the scary part for me. Okay.
If you can direct your answers into this camera.
All right, here we go.
I'm going to take a swig. Okay.
All right.
What performer on TV today totally blows you away and not from your show?
The star of Handmaid's Tale, I should know her name.
Oh, Elizabeth Moss?
Elizabeth Moss.
Okay. What is the last show you binge watched?
Handmaid's Tale.
Do you watch Game of Thrones?
I don't.
Okay, we'll skip that one. What classic TV show would you have loved to be on?
Oh, yikes. Heart to Heart.
Ooh. What's the worst job you've ever had, and it doesn't have to be in acting?
Working in a shoe shop. First job, last real job. Thought, okay, I'm getting into acting. Done.
What are customers like?
A lot of smelly feet. But actually, you get to really size up character. A lot of different types of people come through a shoe shop.
Interesting. Very cool. Well, thank you so much
Wow,
for being
that was
here.
really fast. Wow, done already. Thank you.
Lightning fast. Thanks so much for being here. It was a pleasure speaking to you. And for all of
Likewise.
you, if you want to see more of our Emmy chats, head over to latimes.com.